And Kyrut said, in a finite universe, those who believe in first things first will believe whatever they're told to.
And Kyrut said, a system with some loose wires but still under control has possibilities.
And Kyrut noted, under finite highway conditions, a mind that didn't steer could become like a runaway engine. Yo, yon commuters, chill out. And Kyrut noted, under finite highway conditions, a mind that didn't stare could become like a runaway engine. Yo, yon commuters, chill out.
And Kyrut said, if you ain't got a pivot, you can't turn.
And Kyrut said, local reality for Thursday told the creatures, okay, if I let you off this time, do you promise to come back? And they replied, hey, what choice we got?
And Kyrut said, this is what a certain old man said to his kid last month. Being born into a finite scenario is to dodge living gears, cogs, wheels, and pulleys. And while no one can avoid them forever, you can try and keep your clothes clean while you're here.
And Kyrut said, a man without an aim is like a man on a bus.
And Kyrut said, from a revolutionist, non-essential view, intellectually everyone is issued counterfeit currency, which matters not a whit since city money markets are equally insincere.
On a special holiday, the king of one reality announced, today, those who don't believe that the fights are fixed are free to join in.
And Kyrut said, all factories begin operations in the basement. Eventually, they build upwards. Eventually, ain't fast enough for some.
And Kyrut said, one guy decided to do something new. He said he was going to open a school for the mind. Everyone who heard about it thought he was either stupid or kidding.
For several good, useful years, one man's private motto was, if you've got something to hide, you can't.
And Kyrut said, one secondary city comforted itself by thinking, a man with a headache is my friend. A man tried to comfort himself similarly, but with debatable results.
And Kyrut said, if the making of money does not seem to you to be a hobby, then it's not your hobby and quit worrying about it.
One guy told his local god that he'd put in an 800 number so that he could get in touch with him easier.
And Kyrut said, in secondary strolls, no toe is stubbed that is not identified as stubbed.
He was denied tenure, they said, because of his disinclination to make verbal note of his missteps and failed experiments. But he had no business ever being at that university in the first place.
And Kyrut said, a revolutionist must eventually realize that part of the conversations he hears is life talking.
And from our viewing audience comes this letter. Dear Kyrut, my brother and I hold hands and watch your show. After last night's telecast, he asked me, why does our world have 3 dimensions, but 4 geographical directions and 2 major football leagues? When he gets involved in such questions, his palms get clammy. Signed, 2 faithful viewers.
And Kyrut said, one guy decided he'd try to leave himself alone if he could get himself to reciprocate.
And Kyrut said, to try and be nice, he stood his kid up against a wall alongside himself and said, I just want you to know one thing. Are you going to still try and refine your old song, or go ahead and learn a new tune? Coda. Anything that anybody else has already said is an old song.
The myth of one solar system was that their local god's downfall began the day he started issuing lists of exceptions to what he'd previously said.
And Kyrut said, yesterday morn, one of the earlier speakers in the park proclaimed to those present, the truly wise are usually silent. And a man in the crowd yelled back, is that why there seems to be so few who are wise? And the speaker replied, hey, you figure it out, bat breath. There is talk in city council about requiring some citizens to have a testy license, though I personally don't see the need for it.
And Kyrut said, when faced with mountains, you can either become a mountain climber or else try to look like a mountain yourself.
And Kyrut said, the band had stopped, they were already clearing the tables, and most people were leaving. But this one chap still stood and announced, saving scraps may save a starving man, but who wants to be a starving man?
And Kyrut said, amidst all rebirth is irony, amidst irony, the potential.
And Kyrut said, in some older factories, some union employees become disoriented and have trouble distinguishing between consciousness and circumcision. And a member of an extremist old sorehead crowd grumbled, an inch off the end of most people's minds wouldn't make a bit of difference.
And Kyrut said, the passengers' assumed self-importance is what kept one ship afloat.
Then Kyrut relayed another conversation. People can only do what they're intended to do. Hey, I've already said that. Yeah, but you didn't mean it. Free coupon. People who think like this internally to themselves can oftentimes have difficulty qualifying for workman's compensation.
And Kyrut said, in the secret secondary sense, a real revolutionist is neither anyone's foe or friend. Especially you-know-whos.
And Kyrut said, while visiting the zoo, one guy looked at some animals and scoffed, ha! We're not only better than you 'cause we have clothes and compact discs, but we can imagine, too. Ha! I say. And ha! He said.
And Kyrut said, stupidity doesn't have to stand in line. And a viewer asks, I thought you once said there was no such actual thing as stupidity. I did.
One guy, tired of the city, in a hurry, pissed already, slapped himself across the head and said, don't you ever say that circuits can have moods.
And Kyrut said, over in a bright part of one city, an old man told the kid, you can think anything you want to about reality, and it doesn't make any difference. And years later, the lad asked him, is that because we don't really know what it is anyway? Yep.
And Kyrut gave our quote of the week. I did all right for about 30 years until someone made my hormones understand what death was.
And Kyrut said, it might help if you took an ad hoc view of man's institutions as being an ongoing, collective sigh of temporary relief. Men's minds will take refuge anywhere when pursued by imaginary dragons, even in shelters leased to the fire breathers.
One of the great unrecognized sports of life is running from your own feet.
And Kyrut said, as his daily thought offering, the court philosopher gave the king this one. Your Grace, a man with a dictionary can stop a bullet. And His Most Excellency knew he didn't mean around here.
And Kyrut said, you cannot fully grasp the nature of existence if you allow one dimension of your reality to slip by unnoticed.
A certain neighborhood in one city used to encourage the local kids by telling them, hey, what's the use in even fueling up the plane if you aren't going to crash it? Flight plan update. Hormones are smarter than you think.
Then Professor Obvious pointed out to the class, every author is God to this blank sheet of paper. Then Professor Obvious pointed out to the class, every author is God to his blank sheet of paper. In the struggle between what men call the worlds of commerce and the worlds of art, there is none, which, as always, is why there appears to be one.
One guy says, you know, if I could quit talking about myself at all, I believe I might actually get on the way to somewhere. And another guy says, yeah, to the funny farm. Remember, mental health is no laughing matter.
And a rebel noted, if you live close enough to the edge, you don't have to go looking for search and destroy missions.
And Kyrut said, life plays but one game, win-win.
And Kyrut said, once, while gazing out over his own pastoral neural fields and habitualized hormones, a chap wondered, do those who live on the edge have the edge?
And Kyrut said, if you don't think you're a verb, just do things that make you a noun.
And Kyrut said, one guy's many strokes became so frequent that his new address became his address. When the Greek traveler did reach Stockholm, he called it Athens.
Hey, that's the whole benefit in having eyes rather than seeing.
And Kyrut said, a subversive dad told his lad, in a peculiar way, a man who neurally knows what he's doing can be a real joy to himself, yet still be of no particular interest to anyone else. The youngster may appreciate this more later.
Then the mayor benevolently addressed the city. What is the fun in having consciousness if you're not going to fritter it away? The people continue to just adore the old fraud.
And a viewer writes, sometimes while listening to you, I suddenly feel like this revolution thing you talk about would be like walking in on life itself while it was in the middle of some kind of argument or discussion with itself.
And Kyrut mentioned, around the local studios there seems to be no present scripts that feature roles for both Captain Irony and Professor Obvious in the same project.
And Kyrut said, local reality knew that the creatures were making progress one day when one of them stood up and said, Being cold is no proof. You got to stay cold.
And Kyrut said, to reinforce his position in the caste, one man had tattooed on his bicep the word bicep. On the upper floors of some factories, they won't permit the addition of certain inked-in ornamentations.
Screw being a reporter, said one guy, and became an editor so he could write letters to himself.
And Kyrut said, new view of ordinary affairs. Everything has its price but debt. It costs a man nothing to be born and to subsequently feel bad about having done so.
The little figure perched high atop the factory's roof cried out to those below, if genes are so alive, then why do I feel so dead? Those below did not reply. Those below cannot reply.
And Kyrut said, in one universe, when reality realized that even after men were given eyes, some of them would eventually stop staring, it gave them brains to make up for it.
And Kyrut said, a speaker standing out on the road just past the city limits sign was crying out to passers-by, abandon your claims to talents you do not possess. And a little ways past him was his brother shouting his version, abandon all claims to talents you do have.
An old-time segment told a newcomer, it is those with real ability who never mention it. And the kid asked, well, how would you ever know they had any? And the oldster replied, it is those with real ability who never mention it.
And Kyrut noted, when unprepared, falling out of habit can be even worse.
And Kyrut said, in a fancy jungle far away, the lions once decided they could learn from anybody, even from worms. They were mistaken.
Inside finite ecologies, there are no such species as mistakes, only multiple ways of seeing things.
And Kyrut said, one guy organized his thoughts. A lot they cared. They just laughed at him. And a reasonable fellow thought, if this kind of thinking actually meant anything, it'd be dangerous. I guess maybe that's why it doesn't.
One city warned its citizens, if you change the time around on your problems, you can fuck them all up, so watch it.
And Kyrut said, once you realize that everything proves everything else, you don't need proof.
And Kyrut said, for the sake of rapid expansion, one bus company would only give out erroneous schedules. Each man's birthright is a mind that is a bus company.
Shocks the hell out of me too, but someone in the audience asks, is your reference to erroneous schedules intended to indicate actual problems with the buses themselves or people's perceptions of how they run? I reckon if a man knew the answer to this one, he'd know what the revolution was and could call it anything he liked. I reckon he could even call it as now leaving from gate 7.
And Kyrut offered more non-sequential encouragement for non-pareil thinkers. A lack of intimacy with oneself can prove informative.
And Kyrut said, one king's public bad attitude was just a front to cover up his even worse private one.
And Kyrut said, Over in a make-believe land, an imaginary man goes to a rebel camp and asks, "Does the revolution know what everyone needs?" And the guy at camp says, "Yes." And the man asks, "Does it care?" "Nope, it can't." Over in a make-believe land, an imaginary man goes to a rebel camp and asks, "Does the revolution know what everybody wants?" And the guy at camp says, "Yep." And the man asks, "Does it care?"
Then, as a joke, Kairut gave out with the question of the day: why would a man with a fast car ever want to back up?
And Kairut said, "Compared to local change, which observably seems nourished by the elements involved, universal growth seems not fed at all, and is thus invisible."
And Kairut said, "To err is human. To forgive yourself or to feel guilty about it is to be human twice."
And Kairut said, when things got to be too much for one man, he didn't care. After a while, he began to call it the revolution.
And Kairut said, "If you ask most people to look in more than two directions at once, they go blind." Or seem annoyed.
And to the show came this letter. "Dear Kairut, after watching your program for some time now, I am quite interested, but still do not fully understand what you mean when you talk about the revolution. Dear Kairut, after watching your show for some time now, I still don't even know who Kairut really is. Dear Kairut, I no longer care. Sincerely, etc."
And Kairut said, it was only when he felt unwell that one kid seemed to listen to his own old man. And when he really felt bad, he longed to.
And Kairut said, "Some neurons thought, when you live in a closed system, you can prove anything, or prove that nothing can be proved." And one guy thought, "Geez, I'm glad I live there rather than in front of a TV set watching the Kairut show through eternity."
And Kairut said, "For a long time, one man wanted to contact a revolutionist camp and tell them that he would thankfully take up the life, but only if they could prove to him that it didn't actually exist. Such are the kinds of men the rebellion always needs, but seldom finds." Note, anyone who hears this and does not immediately identify it as being located within one's individual's own mind should be back in the city with a good full-time job.
And Kairut said, one kid told his school, it seems to me unfair to compare vipers in the hair to rats in the crotch.
And Kairut said, after some useful experiences, a guy thought, the revolution is not as simple as it sounds because it's not like it sounds.
On one world, they make paper airplanes from metaphors and sail away, only to return in rockets.